Hello everyone, and welcome to the remastered and re-released 26th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Tetsuo Shima from Akira. Some of you may remember earlier this year when I made a community post talking about the channel getting its first ever copyright strike when the company that owns the Akira manga decided my video on Tetsuo revealed too much of the story, and so it needed to be scoured from the internet. And I mean, I get it. Showing all of you randomized manga panels that still contain the dialogue surely allowed you to read the story without purchasing their books. Right? Right. Anyway, I figured it was about time I got around to remastering and re-releasing this one. For not only is Akira one of the most iconic and influential pieces the manga and anime medium has ever seen, it's also one of my personal favorites. A story that has served as an inspiration for countless works of art within not just the anime and manga medium, but the cyberpunk genre as a whole, and many other pieces of media not associated with the genre. But no great story would be complete without an equally great antagonist, and Tetsuo Shima, fueled by the power of Akira, makes for a brilliant display of what can go wrong when godlike psychokinetic power falls into the wrong hands. And though Tetsuo is without a doubt the driving force behind much of the evil in Akira, this analysis wouldn't be complete without mentioning Akira himself as well to some degree. Now both are presented in different ways in the manga than they are in the film, but the overall structure of the story remains the same between the two, albeit with far more detailed plots and characters that are present in the manga that were cut from the film, which is something anyone who's seen their fair share of literary adaptations will be familiar with. So due to the greater amount of content in the manga and similarities between the two, I'll be going through the manga while noting the differences between it and the film when applicable. Before we get started on Tetsuo though, let me introduce you to our sponsor for this video, Manta Sleep. Good sleep is one of the most necessary things you need to ensure your overall physical and mental health stay in good shape. And it's hard to get the rest your body needs if you're constantly disrupted by unwanted light or noise invading your sleeping area. But that becomes impossible once you pick up a few life-changing products from Manta. Manta offers 8 different styles of sleep masks that gives all types of sleepers the eye protection needed to make your dreaming hours as peaceful as possible. And all of Manta's masks feature unparalleled adjustability, a premium feel, and pro-nap movement that can soothe your eyes as they protect them if you choose their steam or cool masks, or even your ears with the sound mask and its built-in Bluetooth headphones, which is the one I have right here that I can't sleep without now that I've experienced the better quality of sleep my Manta mask has allowed me to have. But now I've been spoiled by a couple new products Manta recently launched that have made things even better. Their white noise machine and earplugs. The white noise machine is compact and features tactile movement that allows you to adjust between 15 different sounds, even while in the dark. And their earplugs are the most comfortable and soundproof I've ever experienced, blocking out all those little sounds that keep you awake, but ensuring you can hear your alarm just fine when it's time to get up. Manta's selection and quality are hard to beat, and with the holidays nearly upon us, I encourage you to browse their website and pick through all the different features of the mask they offer to find the one that best suits your needs, or the needs of someone dear to you that could use a little more rest as well. As no matter what your sleeping schedule is, I guarantee a mask from Manta Sleep will only make you feel infinitely better while you're sleeping and awake. So if you're like me and the slightest sound and tiniest pinprick of light disturbs your slumber, head over to mantasleep.com and use the code VIOLET at checkout to get 10% off your order and enhance your sleeping experience today. Thank you Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. Now without further ado, let's begin. As far as a backstory for Tetsuo before he obtains his powers goes, we don't receive too much, and this is generally the same for all of the characters in this story. We do know that Tetsuo was an orphan, and he grew up with Kaneda, something we learn much later when we get a few scenes depicting Tetsuo reminiscing on his relationship with his parents. And we also get a panel in the manga that depicts him as a baby as well. Here it shows that his relationship with Kaneda began after Tetsuo moved into his neighborhood. And we see in these flashbacks that Tetsuo was abandoned by his parents at an age where he would be consciously aware that he was being abandoned. And he remembers his father remarking that Tetsuo wasn't even his, and he didn't want him anyway. All of which only ensured Tetsuo would have to not only suffer the effects his post-apocalyptic environment would have on his growing mind, but the horrid ramifications of enduring neglect and scorn at the hands of the people meant to nurture and protect you. Not to mention the turmoil he must have suffered growing up in a post-apocalyptic orphanage after he was abandoned. Now, apart from the few panels in the beginning, and the aforementioned ones we received towards the end of the story, this is the only window we get into Tetsuo's childhood and who he was before manifesting his powers. As shortly after he's introduced in the opening volume, he suffers the injury that leads to him obtaining his psychokinetic powers. And after that happens, the remainder of the story revolves around a post-power Tetsuo. His backstory in the film, while much the same, is talked about quite a bit more in relation to Kaneda, as there are several instances in the film where Kaneda notes the intense bond they formed while growing up at the orphanage together. We get about the same number of flashbacks from the film as well, and they, like in the manga, are near the end of the story rather than at the beginning. However, even with what little information we receive about Tetsuo's backstory, it's still important and impactful as far as understanding his character is concerned. His abandonment and memory of it indicates that he's been yearning to be recognized and loved from a young age, and this factored into the envious feelings he had towards Kaneda as they were growing up, developing a deep love towards someone who cared for him, while also desiring to become a person like Kaneda in the process. As we can see at the time our story begins, Tetsuo is still very much affected by the ramifications of his troubled upbringing, and as a result of following Kaneda wherever he goes, he has grown into a teenage troublemaker just like his fellow gang members, and he's also developed an inferiority complex from years of living in Kaneda's shadow and envying all the traits Kaneda has that he himself lacks. With all that being said, it's after Tetsuo returns from the hospital and lab where he was experimented on, and the events of this story are set in motion, where we really get to see the effects of his negative upbringing and envious relationship with Kaneda coming into play. There's a moment before the accident where we see Tetsuo displaying a playful desire to one-up Kaneda and prove himself. But now after he's injured, he starts acting out and displaying more of a reckless side. He nearly kills a rival gang member and lashes out at Kaneda, his supposed best friend, stating that he doesn't take orders from him and stalking away in anger after this incident. I'd like to note here that Kaori, who doesn't appear until much later in the manga, appears quite early in the film as Tetsuo's girlfriend, and while this relationship develops in a much more disturbing way in the manga, which we'll get to later, in the film, his relationship with Kaori is more innocent and loving, even though there is a moment where Tetsuo rebuffs her early on in the film in a bout of anger. Kaori's role is much smaller in the film, but she still serves as the only other person close to Tetsuo besides Kaneda, and her role as a grounding for Tetsuo's insecurities and emotions humanizes his character in both the manga and the film. After being taken back to the lab, the researchers there discover that his powers are being compounded by the effects of the drug he took the night before, and due to his frequent use of his power, Tetsuo starts suffering from an unbearable headache, something which he can only cure by consuming increasing quantities of drugs. This causes a domino effect wherein Tetsuo's powers become stronger and stronger as he uses them, and he subsequently falls further into a depraved quest for an end to the near-constant pain he's experiencing, a brutal cycle of mental and physical anguish that begins corrupting Tetsuo even further than he had been by his upbringing and his maturation into a teenage criminal. This is true enough in the film, but to a lesser extent, because here, Tetsuo's power is only enhanced by the frequent misuse of it, with his use of drugs to cure his headache being almost absent in the film. Eventually, he injects a liquefied concoction of who knows how many drugs into his bloodstream in pursuit of curing his headache, and in tandem with the amount of power that surges within him as a result, his hair jolts back as if he was shocked with an electric current. A change in Tetsuo's appearance occurs frequently over the course of the story, which is concurrent with the rise in energy within Tetsuo and the subsequent damage it does to his body. Tetsuo's appearance changes in the film as well, but again, to a lesser extent, and we don't see the radical shifts in his body over time like we do in the manga. Now Tetsuo, being poorly educated and already on a path of criminality even before his powers manifest, is unable to properly handle his immense powers and returns to a life of crime after he's left the hospital, emboldened by his near invincibility in the face of his foes and his ability to crush anyone who wanders into his path, giving him the perfect chance to become the new boss of a world he had once languished in as only a shadow of the boy he idolized. Ultimately, Tetsuo at this time in the story is an unruly, uneducated child who still has the attitudes, mannerisms, and thoughts of a boy his age, one who's prone to anger and irrational behavior as he pursues his own selfish desires. His personality boils down to angst, anger, and envy, and he frequently displays a sadistic side when he's dealing with those he's trying to subjugate. However, after he's accepted the offer of being trained by the government and he discovers Akira, things only escalate from there. Initially, he's on board with strengthening his powers with the help of doctors, but when he gains knowledge of Akira and his immense power, Tetsuo makes a beeline for his location, freeing him and setting about events that would bring destruction and disorder to New Tokyo. Akira, though he is a catalyst for many of the terrible things that occur in this story, isn't necessarily evil, as the destruction and chaos he causes is a direct result of the manipulation of others, which is in stark contrast to what Tetsuo does here, as he is chosen to carry out the depraved and immoral acts he commits of his own volition. Now when we find Akira, we see that he has been reduced to a shell of a human being from using such an immense amount of power back in 1992 when he became the catalyst for the destruction of the original Tokyo. and after he witnesses the death of Takashi, his power once again implodes, causing the destruction of Neo-Tokyo. Once the dust is settled, Tetsuo, who was inadvertently responsible for this destruction due to releasing Akira, is now using Akira to prop up a new world order he has created in Akira's name, becoming herald of this new order, master propagandist, and the criminal overlord of everything that surrounds him. Tetsuo, now with the lives of thousands of people in his hands and a kingdom of his own, has transformed from a troubled, criminal youth into a sexually deviant and sadistic tyrant, using the guise of charity and salvation to satisfy his desire for power and pleasure. This scenario is entirely absent from the film, and it's instead replaced solely by Tetsuo's rampage to find Akira and the loss of life that occurs as a result of his pursuit of greater power. Akira only appears in person in memories and abstractions here, and though he's ultimately responsible for containing Tetsuo's power, his role in Tetsuo's development is greatly diminished in the film. In the manga, this is when Kaori comes into the picture, who was initially conscripted to serve as a sex slave for Tetsuo, but he quickly forms a connection with her, a connection that's only strengthened after he has a series of horrifying and personal hallucinations when touching Akira's mind. As I mentioned earlier, this relationship comes to serve as a sort of grounding and safe haven for Tetsuo's repressed emotional insecurities and his need for companionship outside of the minions he has working under him. For outside of Kaori, he has no one close to him to confide in during this period in his life. It's after these hallucinations that he seeks a woman named Lady Miyako out of fear of what he's seen when he touched Akira's mind, and she reveals to him that he can unlock his full potential by abstaining from the drugs he's been taking and accepting his pain. Tetsuo struggles with this at first, but he manages to succeed, and in the process, he is reborn through a divine experience fueled by Akira's power. Tetsuo here, rather than displaying his depravity as he had before, seems to have relaxed, and he appears calmer and more collected than he did before, unlocking a part of the truth of himself through his vision, becoming something more and less at the same time. For at this point, it almost seems like Tetsuo has renounced his wicked ways, but that quickly changes when he boards the American battleship housing doctors from around the world who have come to provide relief in the aftermath of the second destruction of Tokyo, and he nearly kills all of them using his powers. Tetsuo has seemingly learned nothing from his eye-opening experience, only coming to grips with the reality of his power and how he is but a mere influencer of a vast universal force that cannot be controlled. And while this knowledge could have served to turn Tetsuo away from his selfish abuse of the godlike power he holds, this experience only strengthens his resolve to enact his cruel will upon the people of the ruined Neo-Tokyo. Here he's now attempting to transcend his former self completely, abandoning his use of drugs and embracing his position as the ruler of his new empire, desiring now to rule through displays of fear rather than the acts of charity he had previously engaged in Akira's name. However, this tactic immediately goes awry, as upon his first display of godlike power when he creates a crater in the moon, he unleashes a massive amount of energy in the process, further accelerating the degradation of his body. We soon see that this is more than the weak vessel that is his body can handle, and as Lady Miyako explained to him earlier, he was already balancing on the edge of control and self-destruction prior to this event. Unfortunately for Tetsuo, it's his ego and his insatiable desire to be at the top of the pecking order of a world he's created that causes everything he's endeavored to achieve here to backfire astronomically, as he now not only resembles an aged man due to the abuse he's put his body through in such a short time, but his body has also started to reject the mass amounts of energy it holds and begins suffering horrific bouts of painful mutation. By the time he gets back to the stadium, his body has undergone such duress that he reverts back into a primal state, a baby-like creature of uncontrollable energy that is only stopped by the timely intervention of Kei. Here we see that Tetsuo's human form has transformed into that of a ghost, slowly regressing to the point where his appearance now almost matches those of Takashi, Masaru, and Kyoko. Once the final battle subsides, Tetsuo mourns for Kaori, the only person he had managed to find some semblance of emotional connection with during his quest for ultimate power, and he takes her with him to visit the site of Akira's imprisonment. And it's here for the first time that we see Tetsuo experiencing something utterly foreign to him: regret. Initially, he's still the stubborn and prideful boy we've seen him as throughout the story, but upon sensing his imminent death, he regresses back to his former self and begs Kaneda to save him from his certain destruction. Similar circumstances occur in the film, but instead of mourning Kaori and returning to Akira's prison, his body instead transforms directly into that baby-like form I described earlier, consuming Kaori in the process. In the manga, it's here at the prison that we get to see the connection that Tetsuo has formed with Akira and the effects it's having on both of them. Tetsuo, ignited by the immense energy of Akira, has become nothing short of chaos itself. And Akira, who has no will of his own, is reacting to the nearest source of psychic power, fueling the transformation of Tetsuo and getting ever closer to once again unleashing his own power. What would have been the third destruction of what remains of Neo-Tokyo, and likely the world, is ultimately prevented by the timely intervention of Ryu, who shoots Akira, causing a shock to be sent through his catatonic subconscious and unlocking the personality that had been destroyed by the overuse of his powers that occurred when he first laid waste to Tokyo. In both the film and the manga, this ending is much the same, as Akira stops Tetsuo with his own power, ending the both of them as well as the espers in the process. And as this story comes to a close, Kaneda has a conversation with Akira while he's engulfed in his power, a conversation he had with him earlier in the film with the Kyoko-possessed Kei while they were held in prison. And it's here where Akira explains that the power that he and Tetsuo held was the power of life itself, an amalgamation of the collective memory of the universe since its inception. The wild, unpredictable, and unimaginable power of everything that ever was and will ever be that was concentrated into a potent force that no mere mortal should have ever been capable of touching, let alone controlling. That being said, though it was a destructive force in the hands of those who were unprepared to wield it, Tetsuo and the others actually held a power that was meant to help humanity advance to the next stage of their evolution and guide the universe along the path it was meant to take. For just like all the elements of the universe that can unleash utter destruction, this power also provides a seedbed that's necessary for all we hold dear. The fire that can burn down your home as easily as it can cook your food. The water that can drown you just as well as it can keep you alive. And here, the universal power that could have propelled humanity to greater heights just as easily as it destroyed it in so many ways. At the end of this story, it seems that Tetsuo in a way has been redeemed and forgiven for what he's done, and so he has been welcomed into an afterlife where he's a friend of the other children who suffered similar fates. A beautiful end for a boy who, though causing immense amount of suffering, endured so much in turn in the short amount of time he was given. And now that we've arrived at this end, we must ask ourselves, who exactly was Tetsuo Shima? He was a troubled youth who grew up neglected and maligned in a world of post-apocalyptic hardship. One who lived in the shadow of a friend he loved, but one who he also envied as what he himself wanted to be. A person who was recognized and admired as a leader, and someone who could be looked up to and counted on like Kaneda. These underlying feelings of inferiority ultimately sparked within Tetsuo the drive to see this desire fulfilled once the means to do so had been given to him in ways he could only have dreamed of. And with the power of a god in the hands of a fractured child, he embarked on a drug-fueled psychokinetic rampage, terrorizing the city of Neo-Tokyo in his attempts to control his pain and further his power. In this pursuit of power, he inadvertently causes the destruction of Neo-Tokyo by releasing Akira. And after its destruction, he supplants himself as a tyrant of a newly formed breakaway state, continuing his lust for power, his insatiable desire to consume drugs to stop his never-ending pain, and using, abusing, and murdering people all along the way. However, it should be noted that both Kyoko and Lady Miyako foresaw Tetsuo's downfall, which might mean that what occurred in this story was more so destiny than anything else. And so perhaps Tetsuo was destined to meet this fate and to take the path he took. But due to the unpredictability of their vision and the effort they took in both stopping him and convincing him to turn away from evil, I believe much of what Tetsuo did with his power, he did of his own volition, and he was more than capable of doing much better with the gift he was given had he chosen to do so. That being said, Tetsuo was still a child when all this happened, a child who was by no means well adjusted and capable of making sensible decisions with the amount of power he was given. So to place all the blame on Tetsuo for becoming what he was would be erroneous, for it was a cataclysmic mixture of so many terrifying factors that made Tetsuo into the monster he became. Ultimately, Tetsuo is consumed by a power he barely comes to grasp, and though he never asked for it and was goaded into taking this path by his government, he still made the conscious decision to take terrible actions in the pursuit of higher power, greed, and pleasure. And though he seems to have been redeemed in the end, Tetsuo in both iterations of this story without a doubt endangered or destroyed the lives of millions of people. And while we may be able to find sympathy for a boy whose chance at an ordinary life was torn from him by so many around him, his rampant megalomania, selfishness, and unrepentant cruelty undoubtedly give Tetsuo Shima the mark of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Tetsuo? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA and Effigy, our Dark Lord channel members, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.